What up, dude?
What's going on, man? How you doing?
Dude, I'm so excited you're here to join us, man.
Man, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Sorry I was late. I just got done doing a podcast right now, and man, it's a phenomenal episode. It will be posted today, and it's actually going to be called Lessons from a Lifer. So the guy we just had on was actually sentenced to life in prison and got out after 21 years.
After
Uh,
21 years.
Phenomenal story, man. Phenomenal story. And he's
Wow.
doing a lot of good things and everything like that, man. So
Give me
yeah.
one takeaway, one or two takeaways from that podcast from the guy who was, doing a life in prison.
So the biggest takeaway I got is that, no matter what it is in life, we're all going to go through detours. And
Yeah,
a lot of times we get distracted by the detour that we forget what the destination is. And
love that.
so for him, I realized at the beginning of the podcast, he tells us what his ultimate goal was. And so as opposed to getting distracted by the detour, mind you, he had a life sentence. He could have easily got distracted, but he didn't. And he still ended up at the destination that he originally wanted before he went in. So don't
That's
get
beautiful.
distracted by it. Right now, we're at a time in life where people are, they're worried, they're losing hope, they're losing hope in society. You got to be at a point where don't get distracted by the detour and focus on the destination.
I love that. That's awesome. For those of you in my audience that are new to Officer Tillman here, he's essentially, obviously, a police officer. I'm going to go into his bio, but he's a father. He's a husband. He has this business called Founder. He's the founder of Breaking Barriers, where they help repair the bond between law enforcement and the community. And you've been at this for a couple of years now. I found you through my brother, who I mentioned, who's a police officer. And I was watching out here in California. I'd be watching CNN, and I'm watching these horrible videos of like the 20-second clips of like going, with law enforcement, often a black man going horrible. And I'm like, I'll be texting my brother, I'm like, what the hell is all this? And
Yeah,
it seemed like every moment I'd see that. He's like, dude, check out this guy's Instagram. He breaks down like the whole footage, gives you step-by-step both perspectives. And it was really educational for me. So all those that are watching right now, be sure to follow Ryan. Go check out, like, anytime you have some sort of police issue come up in the news, you tend to break it down, give both sides of the stories, and it's really educational. And dude, talking about timing to be in this.
man. Thanks again, T-Mac. I appreciate it. And I'm doing the one I just did the one today on the Atlanta one. Um,
That
you
looked,
know,
I mean, I
it,
just caught a glimpse of it, but that did not look good.
it doesn't look good, but it's a prime example of why we need to always gather the facts, put things in context.
Yeah.
The George Floyd thing was absolutely wrong. There's no explanation for it. One of the things that that's happening though is we get this knee-jerk reaction, and all of a sudden we go from one extreme to the other extreme, and so we got to be careful at doing that. So I give my breakdown. So we'll have that posted up on our page today if you guys want to. If you guys are interested, at least to know my opinion about it. Again, my opinion is my opinion. It's not
Right.
necessarily right or wrong.
Well, I would definitely love to see it because, I mean, it's, again, you can talk more into it, but it was originally, it looked really bad. And then I saw where the guy actually had taken the taser away, aimed the taser at the law enforcement officer. And you're like, why did he use force? And I'm like, well, shit, if you've ever been tasered, you lose bodily function. And if the guy, if you don't have function of, your own gun, the guy can take a gun. So it's
Exactly.
interesting. Yeah.
Exactly, man.
And
So,
didn't the dude lose his job for that?
he did. He lost his job, and the chief stepped down. So it's a
Mm.
crazy situation, man. Crazy situation.
It's
But
crazy. Well,
thanks for having me on, man. It's a pleasure to be on. Let's get into it.
no, let's go for it. Real quick, tell me, because I've heard you talk about your podcast, just how the last couple of weeks have been for you, your wife, your mother, your family. I mean, I know just from my brother being a cop right now, it's been an emotional time for our family, and I would imagine for you, given your situation, it's definitely been an interesting time.
It has been, man. It's been an emotional roller coaster for my family for sure. Just because you see all this stuff in the news, I've had so many people say, all cops are bad, or I've had so many people say that there's no such thing as a good cop. People that actually know me too, and it's like, how are you sitting here saying this and you know me? It's not like I'm any different. And so it's been an emotional roller coaster. But I'm not going to sit here and act like it's not. It's just been an emotional roller coaster for me and my family. It's an
Yeah.
emotional roller coaster for the whole country. And anytime we see loss of life, no matter whether it's at the hands of a police officer or somebody else, it's hard. So it's been emotional for everybody. So that's why I'm not going to, give people the woe is me story, because yeah, it's tough, but at the same time, we're all in this together. And so I kind of just choose to have more of an optimistic approach an outlook on everything, as opposed to just feeding into my own emotions. Like I talked about at the beginning of this live session, is, I'm focused more on the destination than I am the detour right now.
Gotcha. And to kind of dive in, obviously it feels so weird, dude, even saying like as a black police officer, as a white police officer, but I feel like in these times, my approach during this has been the first couple weeks is just listening to my brothers and sisters that are African American, getting their take on things, having conversation with my friends and family that are cops, getting their take on things. And now I feel like we're still in, I think, towards the end of the healing phase, and we're starting looking towards solutions. But would love to hear your take as specifically a black police officer right now, your role in the community, what you're seeing with police as a black police officer. I just feel like you're in such a unique situation to really live in both worlds.
It is, man. It's difficult because literally I'm like smack dab in the middle of it. That's at least how it feels. And if you talk to some of my counterparts, they'll say the same exact thing. Like, we get both sides. We get the side of where, friends or family members that don't understand, and they're, crucifying you, saying you're a part of this, corrupted system. But then you get the other side of it where you have officers, unfortunately, that they live in this oblivious world that, police officers can do no wrong, or it's a very rare occasion that we do wrong, which is not necessarily true either. And so I do get glimpses of both of it. But one of the things that I found myself doing is knowing what my truth is. My truth is that I can go out there every single day, impact the communities that we serve by being the best version of me. And I know it sounds cliche. I know it sounds weird, but I have an obligation to you, whoever I'm serving in the community, to give you the best person that I'm going to be. And I do that by leading with empathy and leading with respect. If I can do those two things, then it kind of puts everything else at ease. The whole black guy, off duty, and the black guy as a police officer, it kind of puts those things aside, because now I'm just being who I was called to be as a man in general. And I think that's what kind of gives me that hope to continue to push forward.
Well, I think in moments of crisis, right, like people's characters often revealed. And based on listening to your podcast, it seems your faith is a critical role of how you view your role as a father, a husband, and as a police officer. Can you dive in a little bit about how, because I think that when I see some of the things you're doing, it takes a very selfless approach to things. And I feel like often our ego, whatever, if we're anti-police or pro-police, our ego often gets in the way. And you seem to have this humility, except, at the same time, that beautiful balance of courage, right? So it's not just soft, but there's also courage, right? And I think it's a beautiful balance. Can you talk a little bit about your faith and how that works into how you view your role as a police officer?
Well, really, the only way I can do this job is because of my faith in Jesus Christ. The only way. And the reason I say that is because we have a unique job. And the reason it is so unique is that, on one end, we have to go out there, keep people safe, effect arrests, do all these different things, and basically, put this protective covering over the innocent that they would never see. So, for example, like when everybody's at home sleeping peacefully, well, there's things that are done in the quiets of the night that have to be done in order for you to sleep peacefully. And that's not always pretty. It's the same thing when I talk about, the freedom that we have in this country. Well, that freedom came at a price, and the price that it came at wasn't always pretty. Yeah. But at the same time, we have an obligation to make sure that we're better as police officers. We can't, just think that we've already arrived and we are the best we're going to be. So for me, having my faith at the forefront, it really puts things into perspective for me on how I'm to act as a man in general. You look at the Bible and, you talk about grace and mercy. That's the best example for me and how I need to be as an officer, because grace and mercy is pretty simple when you look at it from the eyes of God. It's like, God extends us a level of grace and God extends us a level of mercy. Even though I may have screwed up, he may extend a level of mercy to me, even though I should be getting something else, but he's not going to give it to me. Well, as a police officer, I have a level of discretion that I can use in my job. Prime example, if I pull somebody over, I have the ability to decide whether or not I should give them a ticket or not. And that's kind of based off of, how I feel. Are they going to learn their lesson, or are they not going to learn their lesson? And so I feel like I need to be led by something spiritual, because I've been given such authority with a job title, that if I'm not led by something spiritual, then who am I actually held accountable to? Mm-hmm. And so for me, I'm held accountable to my God, my Lord and Savior, which is what you guys as the people should feel confident knowing like that's who's going to hold me accountable for doing the right thing anytime I have a contact with you.
Well,
And
I think it's
so,
so. Yeah, I think it's so critical for whatever people's faith background is. There's some sort of understanding at a fundamental society level that we're all brothers and sisters, that we're all connected. So when you see that guy in the street who's an African American man in a hoodie, that's your brother. If you see that police officer in a car, that's your brother as well. That's your sister. And understanding, I think also the human side of both of those two, right, is that often we see the police officer in the uniform, understanding like yourself, you have a wife, you have children you want to go to. By no means do you want to get involved in a shooting today. That is the last thing that you ever want to do. So I think understanding the human side and that connection is really important.
I think people assume that, when officers get in the shooting, they go home and they're all just willy-nilly like, hey, yep, got in the shooting, it's all good now. I'm going
Worst
back to
thing
work.
ever.
It is one of the worst. And I have been involved in the shooting before, and it's not fun. Let me just tell you that. I can't get into the specifics of it, but it's not fun. Like, I mean, there's a lot of, emotional mind games that are going on in your head. Was what you did right? Was what you did wrong? What are people going to think about me? Is the person okay? Am I going to be tried civilly? Am I going to be tried criminally? Like, there's just so many up and down things that go on through your mind. Does this make me less than of a man? And so, when people think that police officers go out every day looking to shoot somebody, that's not necessarily the case, just because there's a lot that also goes into being involved in an officer-involved shooting.
To take a little position, one of the things I'm interested in is we all have these blind spots, right? And the damn thing about blind spots is you can't see them. And so I think for me, that's really where been, my meditation practice and being just trying to humbly learn has been helpful. That being said, it's hard for me to relate. Like, I've had a few conversations with some of my black friends, and their experiences with police officers have been different than mine. Just quite frankly, been different. And I think that's interesting. So I'm curious your thoughts on, not that you can speak for all black people or I can speak for all white people, but what is it that you would like to share that you think that white America is just missing in this conversation? Right? Like, we both agree this is much bigger than George Floyd. This is a fundamental core root issue that's been, it's been the worst part of our society since its origin, right? So I feel like I'd love you to share just a little bit. Like, it's hard to experience something that you haven't, but I'm curious your thoughts on some insight on that.
So without actually knowing the history of where we've come from in a country, it's kind of hard to empathize.
Yeah.
Case in point, you look at, the Jim Crow laws. You look at Emmett Till, who was, ragged to death, and, all for a lady who made it up at the end of the day. You look at the civil rights movement. You look at the plantation. If you watch the movie Harriet about Harriet Tubman, you just see where our country has come from, derived from, and in many ways, there's many hateful things that it's come from, and to know that it still exists in certain ways, certain aspects of our society is terrible. But the reason I bring those things up is because if you want to try to understand, you got to realize that you're never going to fully understand. You know what I mean? Because you've never walked a day in the life as a minority, and so it's hard to understand. But it doesn't mean you can't empathize. I actually did a video today, and I'm gonna post it probably within the next few days or so. When I was in college, I'll never forget going to look for new apartments. Me and my buddy were looking for a new apartment to live in, and my buddy is black, and we were followed by a middle-aged white woman, and she, after a certain time during that party, or not that party, during that aspect of us looking for the new apartment, she basically says, "What are you guys doing?" We're like, "Oh, we're looking for a new place to stay." She was like, "You guys can't afford this, so there's no reason for you guys to be here." So I remember having that experience. And then there was another experience just recently, like 2 years ago, where I got hurt. I hurt my wrist at work, and I went to one of the local hospitals. And as I'm in the hospital getting treatment, there was me, and then I was divided. There was a divider, then there's this white lady, and then there was a divider, and then there's this black guy. So the black guy walks out of the hospital, and he walks in front of me and the white lady. The white lady doesn't know I'm on the left. So when he walks out the doors, she opens her mouth to the nurses there. She's like, did that big scary black guy leave yet? And in my mind, I'm thinking like, did she just say that? And so it was a weird moment because the nurses are trying to, comfort me or make me feel better. And it's like, it's okay.
Yeah.
So I bring those stories up because there's still prejudices that still exist.
Yep.
And a lot of it has been derived from, you look at the blackface movement, like I said, the Jim Crow laws. There's places where these things derive from, and that's why they still exist in certain areas. So can we get through it as a society? Can we get beyond it? I think we can with time. We're really not that far removed from the civil rights movement. We're only like 50 to 60 years removed from it. So it's
Yeah.
really not that long.
What?
But I think we can get there. We will get there. I mean, my kids, they're half black, a quarter Filipino, a quarter Hispanic. So just by pure procreation,
Right.
with interracial dating, we'll get beyond that. But it's going to take some time.
Yeah, and I try to remind people all the time, especially my friends here on the West Coast, how much better it's gotten in such a short period of time. I mean, I grew up around the first part of my childhood in a primarily all black neighborhood. I was like the little white guy playing football with all the black guys, right? And I think I became buddies with all of them. And it wasn't necessarily the word black wasn't a word back in the Deep South. It was the N word, right? That's what you often heard, right? And the idea of interracial dating just was like not a chance in hell, right? And so I've dated African American women. I've brought them back home. I look at my younger cousins and I look at their friends, how much more intermingling it is of races, and I see just how better. I guess again, I'm just the optimist, so much more optimistic. I see how much better it's coming just in my lifetime, within 20, 30 years. And so I'm definitely I'm hopeful for the future, but I think that we have to continue having conversations, particularly with people who look different, think different, and believe different. And you may not necessarily agree with everything they say, but seeing the human in the other person is critical.
Yeah, we got to be able to agree to disagree on things, and just really, like I said, empathy. Like the mere fact that I was able to have an hour and a half conversation with somebody that was in life for killing. He took another man's life. That's why he was in prison. And we sat here and had a conversation. And one of the things I've always told myself as an officer, anytime I arrest somebody on the street or whatever, I always tell them, look, my job is not to judge you. Sometimes it's harder than others because depending on the crime, it's pretty hard not to, but it's still not my job to judge you. I have a job to do and I'm going to do my job. But at the end of the day, God is going to be the ultimate one that's going to judge every single one of us for every crime. So since we got that out of the way, now let's focus on how I can try to extend a level of grace and mercy to you and treat you like a human being as opposed to treating you the way you probably deserve to be treated. Right. And that's where we got to get to, because we got to be able to see the human behind every soul. You know what I mean?
And that's a deep work that has to be done on the individual level too. And to kind of transition a little bit, I think that again, as we're still in that healing phase a little bit, but as we start moving into a solution phase, I think that I wanted, like what I've been doing is some research, looking at data, looking at what's really happening. I mean, so there's a disconnect, at least from what I see, between the feeling of like police officers are out there just gunning down black men and what the data is showing. Can you share some of that, of what you know on your end, and if that disconnects there, and some points to some of that?
Yeah, so the data, so one of the things I tell you now, when it comes to, I'm all about the facts and I'm all about the data, but I'm all about being sensitive to the time and the way we share and when we share things.
Absolutely.
Coming off the heels of George Floyd, I would see people talk about the data as opposed to, well, there's more white people that are killed by the hands of police than there are black people. I get it, but it's not the time or place to talk about it. Just because, it's somebody actually, I had a white friend of mine bring this up, and I hate throwing race in there, but I need to throw race in it to paint the perspective. As he told me, saying Black lives don't matter or saying all lives matter is like going to a breast cancer awareness event and saying that, well, lung cancer matters too.
Right. It's a great analogy.
And I was like, man, that kind of makes a lot of sense. And so when we talk about data, yes, there is a lot of data out there that shows that more white people are killed by the hands of police officers than there are black people. And then you get into, but then you got to talk about the proportion, and the proportions that, how many times are you more likely to be used force as a black man than a white man? There's so many different facts that go into it. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, there's one constant. And the constant thing is police are going to use force on people if somebody is, or if somebody's trying to resist, if somebody's trying to flee from us, whatever it may be. The constant is officers are going to use the level of force. The what we got to discover is, okay, what type of force are they using, and is it based off of the color of their skin? That's the hard thing, because to say that something is based off of race by watching a video is very, very difficult to do. For example, we talk about the George Floyd situation. Immediately it was associated to race, like this was racial. We saw an 8-minute video, and by that 8-minute video, I was without a doubt able to say that this was unjustified. It was wrong on all accounts. It was homicide, if you ask me, just by watching an 8-minute video. What I was not able to explain was this racially motivated? And the reason that's hard to explain is because the way you're going to determine whether or not something is racially motivated is going and backtracking and see, okay, is this guy, arresting more black people than he is any other race? Is this guy has a history of making, racial slurs? Does he have a history of, discriminating against other people? That's how you determine whether or not something is racially charged or not. So,
or is this just a bad cop, right? I mean,
exactly.
it very well could be a bad cop.
By watching at it initially, that, it was more of a contempt of cop, meaning the cop didn't want to give in to it. He didn't want to drop his guard. He didn't want to break his pride. And that's why he kept his knee on George Floyd's neck, as opposed to it being racial at that moment in time. Now, if they come back after the fact and say, hey, look, you know what, this guy has a history of this, history of discrimination, by all means, we can start labeling this a racial issue. Yeah. But we got to get out of the habit of, making assumptions and saying this is all based on race when we don't know the facts of the matter yet, because that's, where we start becoming divisive as a people.
Well, so Ryan, what I'm trying to get at, again, while I'm trying to reflect on the data, right, is that, well, one, I think what you said was beautiful, right? There's a time, and like, I had a conversation with my boy Jarrell, good friend of mine, African-American, great trainer in Nashville. And he said, it's like, Todd, right now I feel like I'm jumped. I just need your help, right? Was not a time to start talking about data, right? It's a time to put your arm around your brother, say, I love you, how can I support you? And I think that's something of I see a lot of my really hardcore conservative friends just throwing out the data without the love. And I think the love and the intention has to be there, because the data may show this, but unless that person knows you give a shit about them, it's just going to wash over. 100%. But I do think it's important, Ryan, that we look at, is there systematic racism in the police force, right? And so that's why I'm trying to really do my homework and research on that. So that's why I'm asking the questions about the data. Is there systematic racism in the police force?
If you ask me, I would say systematic racism in the police force exists, but not everywhere. And the reason I say it not everywhere is simply because every police department, no matter where you go, is different. And if we talk about police reform, we also have to talk about, well, where are the lapses at in our policing and as a whole? Well, one of the lapses is that there's not one police department that's governed the same way across the state of California. You go from city to city, state to state, county to county, it's all going to be different. And so, for example, the police department I work at is very, 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 it's a phenomenal organization. It's ahead of the curve in so many different areas. Whereas if I go to a department down south or somewhere else, it may be a whole different other aspect. And so where we talk about the systematic racism is that, do people get, do they get, what's the best way to say it? Do they get a certain level of, what's the best way? I'm trying to think about the words so I don't butcher this. Is there preferential treatment based off of the way of the color of your skin involved in our profession? And if you ask me, I would say yes, in parts. Just because, and as a black man being in the middle, you see it. You know what I mean? I've seen, I've heard officers, or whether it be on a video or seen officers in articles, making racial slurs to people. And so if you see that right there tells me that we still work in a system that, there's discrimination at its roots and core, depending on the organization. But you can't say it's true for every organization. And so we have a tendency in our society to paint everything with this broad brush. And as officers, one of the approaches I take from Breaking Barriers United is like, you got to individualize and base it on that human being. So talking about the data, when you look at the data involving, like I said, per capita, white metaphors that used against black people per white people, per capita, you're going to look at it and say, well, there's a lot of disproportionate numbers that we got to recognize. But at the same time, we got to be able to realize that it's hard to lump everybody into one category because it's so systematically different wherever you go. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it hurts my nerves because I get painted with the same broad brush as somebody down south that has no training, and whereas I have all the training in the world, and we're focused on diversity at my department, but I can't say the same thing for another agency.
Right. and I want to dive into more of your training in a bit, but back to this. So some of the stuff I've been looking at, I want you to let me know if I'm on point here, or you don't think this is factual, or where you could point me in a better direction. So I'm looking at, because again, I think the feeling, right, is when we watch the news, police officers are gunning down black people, right? And so I'm sitting there asking, well, shit, like how many cops are killing African Americans? And so this is what I found on the Washington Post. Feel free to validate it or not. In 2019, there were unarmed 10 African Americans killed by police, 9 men, 1 woman. I think roughly 5 of the 10 deaths, the person had physical altercations with the police first. So when I'm looking at, and again, if this data is correct from the Washington Post, which I believe they get from the FBI, if I'm looking at 320 million Americans, roughly 41 million African Americans, and there were 10 unarmed deaths. Now, don't get me wrong. I think every person that died is a brother and a sister and has human value. But when we're looking at making the case that you guys are out there gunning down black people, and I look at 10 out of 41 million African Americans.
Yeah, it's not telling a truthful story.
That's a fraction of a percent. Just to get things in perspective, because again, for those of you right now that are in an emotional state, this may not be the place to grab this, but I think it's important as we move to solutions, especially when we're talking about defunding the police, that we look at some of the data for the solution based. So just take a guess, according to a Johns Hopkins study, how many people were killed in medical malpractice in the United States?
It's astronomical. I mean, if I had to say, I mean, a number of probably, what, 1,000? I don't know.
According to Johns Hopkins, which is a hell of a lot smarter than I am in this subject matter, they estimate roughly 250,000 Americans died every year to medical malpractice.
Yep.
Right. Now, that's a hell of a lot bigger than a number than 10 African Americans. And I think total it was 30-something, including whites. So it was like 20-something whites and roughly 10 African Americans. And don't get me wrong, every police officer should be held to the highest standard and held accountable for their actions. But I think when we start talking about defunding the police and attacking Officer Tillman because he's wearing a badge, that we do look at some of the data. One more thing that I came across, and this is something I want to encourage all you guys. Look, this is what I'm finding. If you find stuff contradictory, feel free to share it with me. My goal and intention of this is to move us to better as a society. I think the most thorough analysis that I came across was the Fryer study by a Harvard professor. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard about that one. I haven't looked at that one, though.
He's actually an African-American professor at Harvard. And he did this really big abstract, this thorough analysis on, and I'll read the abstract real quick. And it sounds very similar to what you're saying. The paper explores the racial difference in police use of force. On non-lethal use of force, blacks and Hispanics are more than 50% more likely to experience some sort of force in interactions with police. Adding controls that account for important context and civilian behavior reduces, I think it said in the paper, reduces to 20-something%. But either way, minorities experience more hands-on from police, and there was no data to figure out why that happened other than it could potentially point towards some sort of prejudice. But he said on the most extreme use of force, officer-involved shootings, we find no racial differences either in the raw data or contextual factors are taken into account. We argue, which it seems very much what you're saying, that the patterns in the data are consistent with a model in which police officers are utility maximizers, a fraction of which have a preference for discrimination, who incur relatively high expected costs of officer-involved shootings. So the general thing was there is some data that points to minorities are getting maybe roughed up a little bit more than white people. But when we're talking officer-involved shootings, there was no data. And this is a guy's a hell of a lot brighter than I am that did an analysis on this. Again, you can go check it out. He's way more qualified to do this, but it sounds very similar to what you're saying. There's fractions of this in society. Just like as a personal trainer, there's fractions of personal trainers that are racist. There's fractions of it that are bad personal trainers. Y'all are just very unfortunate in the situation, whereas if I screw up as a personal trainer, someone may pull a hamstring for not doing a good warm-up.
Yeah.
You screw up, someone could die.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of it I think that's where a lot of people get upset about is they're saying, hey, well, you have the ability to essentially take my life, which there's truth to that. But at the same time, one of the things I want to highlight that you brought up was the medical malpractice.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, we live in a society where, you know, it is popular to talk about, you know, police or police shootings.
Yeah.
And when all actuality, we should be worried about our kids going to school if, you know, there's a teacher that's molesting my kid or preying upon a kid, or going to the doctor and that doctor not being, you know, running a practice that's not even official practice. And so if we're going to come with that energy against police, we need to come with that energy with the other professions, but that's not the reality we live in. And so I don't have the numbers on me. I have it somewhere, but I don't have it on me right now. But if you talk about the amount of police contacts that we have per day, with the amount of people that we contact per day, with the amount of interactions, whether it be physical or non-physical per day, and the amount of times that we actually use force or kill somebody, it is like a small percent, like 1%, if that.
I think it's a fraction of a percent is when I look at it. I think you guys have millions of interactions throughout the year.
Per day. Just myself. Like,
well, I know it's thousands per day for sure.
Exactly. And I don't work at a huge agency.
Yeah.
And just per day, I probably go on about, you know, 12 to 15 calls for service, dealing with 12 to 15 different people. And I can count on one hand how many times I probably use force throughout the month. Actually, I can't count. I mean, like there's not, actually, no, I take it back. I can count on one hand how many times I've actually used force on somebody. And I've been a police officer for about 7 years.
And you can count how many times you've been account for 7 years.
Exactly.
You know, I was just, my brother, we had these conversations, and he was sharing me something similar too. He said, you know, are there cops who probably shouldn't be cops? Yeah.
Without a doubt.
He goes, without a doubt. And he goes, but in my, 9-10 years of being a cop, I have never seen one cop not running to a burning building or a gunfight when there's a 5-year-old kid inside that building and ask, what's the color of that kid's skin?
No, we
not once. Because you just go. Because you don't even get, it's not even on your mind. There's a kid in danger. Your job's to go get him out.
Exactly. And so, I was just I did that on one of my posts today, is that, you know, I have a lot of white partners who are really good friends of mine. As a matter of fact, I just went on a trip with one of them, and I've been in some crazy stuff with that guy. And not once have I ever thought that this dude is racist or he's, you know, being prejudiced. The one thing that we can't discount, though, is that we all grow up differently. So you hear rhetoric come out that, you know, all police officers need to have a college degree. Well, I'm sorry, but college degrees don't necessarily equate to life experience. You know what I mean? So, you know, I have a college degree and great, but I also have life experience. And at the same time, you know, should there be a level of education for police officers? Yeah, it does help in certain situations. But the reason I say that is because, you know, some people say, oh, well, all police officers should be educated. That's not realistic. You know what I mean? Then we talk about defunding the police. Well, why the same people that talk about defunding the police are the same people that talk about, well, police officers need more training. Well, training costs money. So where do you think that money's going to come from? It's got to come from certain places. So, you know, I'm all about reallocating funds to different places. You know, I know they talk about putting money towards homelessness. Man, let's do it. I'm all about it. You know, I just talked to the brother right now that was, again, he was sentenced to life in prison. And he is a prime example of how programs, you know, rehabilitation programs do work. But at the same time, we can't start talking about, oh, we got to take a lot of this money away from police departments because it doesn't work. There's got to be a better structure. For me, I think that better structure is we got to have more of a unified system, nationally speaking, that's a globalized standard of what law enforcement should look like as a whole, because now we can hold ourselves to the same standard as opposed to, well, one department across the country, they have this standard, but on another end, they have this standard. You know what I mean?
We got a question from a guy of 49ers, something about putting cops of the same race in the local. I was going to go and dive this more from questions from the community, but while we're here, we can dive into this. I've had another conversation with a buddy of mine, James, super successful, awesome dude. He's a physician here in town, also happens to be black. It feels weird even saying that shit. But, you know, he was asking about why don't we put more cops, or you have to live in that neighborhood to police it. And two real quick thoughts on that. I'm curious your answer was, you know, my brother used to be a cop in a small country town where we grew up, and the community relations was critical, he said, for their overall well-being, right? Where he knew someone's grandma that they were going to go arrest, so he could go talk to the grandma. hey, this is about to go down. We want to do this in the best way possible. Or, hey, this is what's taking place in the community. And they would come to him. So they had that kind of small town feel. And now he's, in a bigger city work, and they don't quite have that. But that being said, I love the concept of an officer having personal relationships in the community. But again, dude, I grew up, my dad was a cop. I grew up in a rough neighborhood the first part of my life. And there's a reason why we got the hell out, right? I mean, everyone is talking about this. Like a lot of some of my, friends here that live in really nice places, their ass ain't living in the hood.
Well, and also I was gonna say is like, I have a wife and 3 kids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you got to realize that not everybody likes the police. Part of my job, I take people to jail. Part of my job, I put hands on somebody. Part of my job, I deal with gang members who work for a higher power than I do that is putting green lights out on people because you're messing with their money. So if I live in the same community that I police, then that now makes me and my family susceptible to retaliation because I did something that's wrong. Now, don't get me wrong. Are there officers that live in the communities that they're police? Yes. But take like some of those neighborhoods that you're talking about. If I work in one of the worst neighborhoods in Los Angeles, I'm not about to put my family and live in the same neighborhood that I work just because, again, people fail to realize that we still deal with evil elements that exist. We go back to the spiritual. It's a battle versus good versus evil. There are evil people out there that want to do some evil things. So, no, you're not going to get every police officer to work in the communities. Now, what I can tell you is just because you don't live in the same community that you work, it doesn't mean that you can't take that community. You can't take ownership of that community that you do work in. And that's where we can be better. And
I think it goes back to a lot of, just like it's really hard for a white person to understand the racism that exists because we don't experience it as often or much. I think it's the same thing unless you grew up in one of these neighborhoods, right? Like, again, I'm super blessed, man. I only lived there until I was about 9 or 10. But I can remember crackheads bleeding down the face, cocaine all over them, beating on our door at the middle of the night. And my dad's out of town. It's just me, my mom, and little brother. I'm 9 years old, right? Yep. You don't want to be out of town and have your 9-year-old have to answer the door to a drug dealer with cocaine and blood on his face.
Nope.
Right? We got the hell out of there. Right?
Nope.
Like, you don't want to deal with that. So I understand the importance of the relationships, but I'm not depending on the neighborhood, I'm damn mindful of where I put my wife and kids, for sure.
So, I saw, I think it was 49ers that said it too, is why don't we have, why do we have white officers policing the Asian neighborhoods and stuff like that? Yeah. Again, and I understand your logic behind the 49ers, I get it, but we also have to be realistic. We need a certain amount of police officers to patrol our streets effectively in order to make sure that we can resolve crime and all that other stuff. So to say that we want to have, only Asian people patrol Asian communities, well, you're not going to, let's say you may not have all the Asian applicants that you need to be a police officer. Look at black officers. I'll tell you now, in the overwhelming, feeling in the black community is that they don't like police officers. I can tell you that as a black guy, and I can tell you that growing up in black neighborhoods. So that's why I do what I do from my organization, trying to change perception, is because yes, it would be nice to have more black officers patrol our streets. But if we raise our kids not liking police, how do you think they're going to be when they get older? And they've been raised to think that F12 or F the police or no cop is a good cop. And so that's why it's important for us and for me to be who I always am. I still wear my J's, rock my fitted hat, and be who I'm not going to change because I have a badge and a gun. But I got to change the perception of the community so that way we can get some good qualified candidates that come from diverse neighborhoods into the profession. But we can't also drop our standards either just because we want the best qualified people to do this job. So it's a twofold approach that we have to take as law enforcement officers and as civilians.
So my buddy Jarrell put a comment down there below. Awesome dude. Thanks, Jarrell. What's up, brother? Hope you're doing well in Nashville. He wrote, but that's just I think you said that's segregation. And I think that's an interesting point to segue into. If the data that I'm looking at is true, where roughly 10 African Americans were killed that were unarmed, I have a hard time buying that it's the police officers that are ruining the African American community. So back to Jarrell's question of segregation, how do we uplift our African American brothers and sisters and in these communities, someone who works in them every day like yourself, who's not sitting in some nice, beautiful place in some nice air-conditioned house who sees stuff on CNN, but someone who's got their hands in the work every single day. how do we uplift these communities as a society? What are some of the things you've seen?
So if we want to just be honest, man, we got to treat people like human beings and stop treating everybody like criminals. You can be a criminal, but it doesn't mean I got to treat you like a criminal.
Yeah.
And that's where it's very important to understand that that's why it is important to get more people that come from, you know, tougher neighborhoods into the profession, because you're going to have a level of experience that certain people may not have. If you come from a neighborhood where you've never experienced any crime, you never experienced any other diversity, you know, in your neighborhood, it's going to be hard for you to go into a city where it's diverse as ever and people are facing a lot of economical issues that they've never experienced. So just right there, you have a barrier and you haven't even opened your mouth. So one of the things that we can do is we got to make sure that we treat people like human beings. I saw a dude at the gas station yesterday and, you know, he looked a little rough around the edges, but I'm not judging people by the way they look. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I start judging people by the way they talk. I'll start judging people by gang signs, by colors and things like that, you know, and that's from a criminal element, not necessarily judging them as a human being. But in the back of my mind, I have these things that are going on, but that's not what I'm vocalizing. What I'm vocalizing is like, hey, what's going on, my man? How you doing, man? How's your, man, that's a nice car you got. What's going on? Treating them like I would treat anybody in my family. The issue is we have other officers out there that may not know how to communicate. And this is a communication job. You can't get into this job if you don't know how to communicate effectively with people. And so if we want to improve the relationships we have with our community, we got to be better at communicators. That it comes down to that.
Yeah. And again, this is not to let off any police officer that's racist or doing a horrible job. I think Darrell said get out and talk to people in the community. I think that's a beautiful and awesome thing. I do think that we have to figure out a way to uplift those in poverty in an economical standpoint. If we're really going to give them some equity and self-worth, that white, black, green, yellow, I don't really give a damn. If you don't have a job or you're down and out and you don't have a meaning and purpose in life, you're more likely to make bad decisions. And look, the history of this country has suppressed African Americans. If you look at the history of this country, anyone who denies that is just not looking at reality. So when you think about how we really get in and uplift this community, I don't want to butcher this. And again, I'll put links to all this for, I believe it's the Brookings Institute. Are you familiar with the paper they did, the analysis on what are the top 3 things that we can do to uplift people out of poverty? And again, I'll put links to this and challenge me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that the 3 things that they broke down everything that we could do to help uplift people out of poverty was 1, make sure someone graduates high school. How can we help our brothers and sisters in poor economic situations graduate high school? 2, don't have a baby before marriage.
I can take care of it. Yep.
Right? And I think wait till you're 21 or 23 to get married before you do that. And 3, get a job. Those are the 3 things that how we uplift someone out of poverty. If you do those 3 things, you should not be in poverty in the United States. Now, it sounds simple, but I had 2 great parents to make sure I did homework. Not everyone in these communities have people that are looking out for them like that, right? So I think when we start looking towards solutions, how do we go into these neighborhoods, help build programs that can help someone get on the right track based on relative data so they can get a good job, they can start having some meaning in their life. And then when they start having that meaning, then they're able to add more to society and hopefully get out of tough situations.
So you're exactly right. And I think it's Alcarian Amber or Amber. You're exactly right. Teen centers, sex education, job training, that's all part of it. And one of the things I want people to understand, I look at the COVID-19 thing.
Yeah.
And we look at COVID-19, and when it first came out, there's all these, you know, reactive approaches. Clean your house, clean your dishes, put gloves on, make sure you stand 6 feet apart from people. But when you look at the data, the people that were dying are people that are out of shape, high blood pressure, you know, suffering from diabetes. So if we look at the root of the issue is that we need to get in better shape, right? But yet we're not addressing the root of the cause. We're reacting to situations. Same thing with our societies right now is we're reacting, and law enforcement is more of a reactive. We're reacting to somebody doing something as opposed to getting to the root of the issue. There's a book, and I encourage you guys to read it. It's called The Boy Crisis, and it talks about the lack of dads in the home. When you come from a single parent home, the odds of you actually going out there and having the odds that get stacked against you are a lot higher than a person that comes from a 2-parent home. Yeah. You know, you talk about the economic, you know, one of the things that we talked about, economic elevation. Yes, we need to be able to teach principles. So we talk about systematic racism. You know, in the Black community, we were never really taught initially how to go out there and be wealthy. You know, think about it. When we had slaves back in the day, one of the things that they prevented slaves from doing was they prevented them from reading, because they figured out if they could read, then they can figure out how to get themselves out of bondage and how to get themselves out of slavery. So now you're looking at a systematic oppression that was institutionalized through the system of America, right? Well, we haven't fully gotten out of that. So if you go into minority communities, one of the things that's not shared there is how to go out there, how to talk about generational wealth. You know, one of the things I'm big on is generational wealth.
Huge.
You know, going out there, buying real estate, buying property, renting stuff out, you know what I mean? Investing your money here, investing it there. Well, that's not what we're necessarily taught. So the unfortunate part about all this is the reason I'm on here today is I'm a police officer. And law enforcement has become the doormat to society's problems. And so, and what I mean is that something crazy happens, they look to law enforcement first because we're like the first level of a government entity. And now they start to release all of that negative energy on law enforcement when in actuality, we're not necessarily the full problem. Do we have our own problems? Without a doubt. But what about the judges? The judges that are sentencing people to a lot more time as opposed to somebody else that they sentenced to no time that have the same exact crime. We go back to the war on drugs where, you know, you got more time for possessing crack cocaine than you did powder cocaine. When it's a law enforcement officer.
It makes absolutely no sense.
No, it makes no sense at all. But we know that there was crack cocaine in the minority communities, and there was powder cocaine in the more affluent communities, and therefore, because you had crack cocaine, you got more time. So that's the systematic racism that exists that we need to address. But it's not, that systematic racism isn't as you know, it isn't within law enforcement as much as we like to believe it is.
Well, and I think that I posted this yesterday on Instagram, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this. And it was a simple sentence, but it was pretty powerful, and at least what I believe, it sounds like you too, is this is not an either or, it's a both and.
Yeah.
Right? So think about it. Both sides, if the extremes on both sides are going to make you anti-police, anti-black, right? But can you sit there and say, all right, I'm actually Black lives do matter, but I also support the police. So can you figure out ways to inject the word "and" into all these things? Yes, African Americans seem to commit more crimes, and we're going to commit to uplifting those communities and helping them become, you know, more economically stable, right? Because you talk about generational wealth, this is not across the board, because I got plenty of cousins that are, you know, some low income, poor ass white folks where I'm from, for sure, that have had a hard ass life. But when you look at it as a whole, the passing on wealth for white people has been a hell of a lot easier than it has African Americans, because y'all started with shit. Y'all started with nothing, right? So you have to understand, this isn't like black people are there because of the pigment of their skin. It's an and problem, and it's an and solution.
Well, we've created a system and division in our country. Prime example, the best example that we can look at this in our face is your political party. You're either a Republican or a Democrat. And if you're not one of those, then you really don't have a voice. And the sad thing is that if you're a Democrat, well, I can't look at anything that the Republicans say that's getting good. If you're a Republican, oh man, I can't look at anything. Or if you're, you know, if it's vice versa, oh, I can't look at what they have to say is good. And it's like we've gotten in this mentality that like you're either this or you're that. You can't be in the middle. My organization, me personally, I pride myself on being in the middle. Because I am in the middle. As a black man in America, as a black police
You're right down in the middle.
I'm freaking right in the middle of it. And so I see both sides of it. I've been involved in some crazy use of force situations, but at the same time, I've experienced levels within our systematic in law enforcement that can be better. So I see both sides of the chain. So we got to get away from this, man. You're either this or you're that, and you can't be anything else. Like, I understand there's good that has come out of Black Lives Matter, but there's also a lot of bad. There's, you know, the whole thin blue line. Man, boy, I understand what the thin blue line is about. I get it. You know what I mean? The thin blue line is there where that line that separates the good and evil. I get it. But at the same time, I view the thin blue line in many ways, in many aspects, as when people see that, they see it as a brotherhood that we can't necessarily take people in. And so it automatically creates a division. So that's why, you know, I'm like, we got to be careful on, you know, putting up these whether it's symbolism, whether it's, you know, a organization name, we got to be careful and to saying like, look, this is all I stand by and I don't see anything else. You know, I can't see it any other way. Like The last example I'll use is this. I'm not here to talk about whether or not I endorse President Trump or not, but I use this example in everything I do. If President Trump were to go out there and feed 100 million, African-American children, right, tomorrow,
Yep.
how many African Americans would be able to acknowledge that and say, man, that was a good act. Thank you, President Trump.
Right.
Or would they be blinded by the hate in their heart just based off of their preconceived notion because he's one, a Republican, and two, he's not the most politically correct dude. So
Right.
my point in saying that is that we can't always be so clouded by our emotions, and we got to be able to respond and say, you know what? He actually did something right. Or this person actually did something. I said the same thing for Obama, because you had a whole bunch of people that hated Obama on the right side of things.
Yep.
But there were some good things that Obama did as well. We're all humans at the end of the day. We're all going to make mistakes at the end of the day. So, we got to get beyond, identifying sides and saying, look, it's okay to disagree.
And we're getting close to wrapping this up here. And I want to encourage you people. So one thing we talk about here at T-Mac Fitness a lot is moving your body, connecting to your spiritual practice each and every day. Before you turn on social media, before you look at the news, you need to control your inputs into your mind before you open this up, right? Because what happens is you get those, so understanding how the media works, whether it's Facebook, Fox, CNN, how the whole game works is they're all competing for your time, right? You're super busy. They're going to put up some headline that taps into a deep primal fear, right? So if you're conservative, you're most likely to watch Fox, you're going to see a headline, Hispanic illegal immigrant comes in, rapes white woman, right? We all know the majority of Hispanics in this country are amazing, family-based, faith-based people that are incredible, but there's bad apples and all, right? Now, if you watch CNN, you're going to see a 15, 20-second clip of some white officer shooting a black guy. So my encouragement for you guys is, one, move your body, connect to your spiritual practice before you have any inputs. And then when you recognize that trigger or whatever that emotional base is, step back and observe that. Right? Just take a moment. Why do I feel this way? And because these are your own personal biases for whatever way you were raised, your genetic makeup that you relate to. And these media companies are spending billions of dollars understanding how your brain works. We had this idea that we're going to log into Facebook today and that Ryan's going to see the same filters I'm going to see. No. Ryan is seeing a whole different algorithm based on his own personal biases, right?
Yep.
And so I think learning to be aware of those, and the last thing I would encourage in this is something I've been doing is when you recognize that, take a step back, don't react to anything emotionally, and you should be trying to do 2 to 3 times more proving yourself of the opposite belief. For example, let's just take faith. So I'm a man that believes in God, but I listen to a guy named Sam Harris, who's an incredible intellectual atheist. Right? I love listening to Sam Harris because he basically challenges me on my fundamental beliefs in God. But now going through that process is painful.
Yeah.
Right? But it makes me stronger in my belief systems if I'm willing to do the work, as opposed to just saying, oh, I'm going to jump on this team and not actually dig into the uncomfortable moments.
Man, what you just said, if we want to talk about how we can do and change things, is we got to be willing to do the work.
Yeah.
I said last week, everybody right now is out there protesting and putting up a black screen or whatever it may be. And that's all good and dandy. Hashtag George Floyd, all great. But what happens in 2 months when the next big headline? It happened a lot sooner than what I expected. It happened in a week where now we're on to this thing in Atlanta.
Yep.
So what are we actually doing in order to change the way our society is? The sad thing is a lot of people don't want to do the work. You got to realize, I got to.
Lost. What's that?
You there?
Yeah, I lost you for a second. Go ahead.
You there?
Yeah.
You there?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Somebody called me. My bad. So I got a family. I got a wife. I got 3 kids, and I work a 40-hour-a-week job. I run a full-time business with Breaking Barriers United. This morning, I actually, I got off of work at about midnight, didn't get to sleep until about 2 o'clock in the morning just to wind down. And then when it was all said and done, I woke up this morning, came to the studio, put out some content for everybody to see, the breakdowns, educate people, did a podcast. Now I'm on with you. And then as soon as I leave here, I'm going back to work. It takes work. It takes a lot of work. And so it's okay to say things. I'm good with you saying stuff, but make sure you go out there and do the work. Put the work that goes into it as well. Because if you don't do that part of it, then you really shouldn't be saying much.
No, I mean, that's my take on it as well, is that, hey, people want to express themselves on social media. That's great. But if we're really about improving the lives of African Americans in our society, it's going to take us getting off our ass and doing the work. I don't judge someone's character by a social media post. I give a shit about how they live their life over an extended period of time, over years, right? So I mean, if you want to post something, that's awesome. We're having these conversations. But if we leave it at that, we're doing our future generations, our kids, a disjustice of not building a better system. Dude, we probably don't have very long. I want you to talk to you real quick about your company, Barriers United.
Breaking Barriers United.
Breaking Barriers. Real quick about what that does, because I love the videos of you we have 2 minutes remaining. I love seeing the stuff with you in school systems. Talk about everything you're doing real quick and where people can find you.
Yeah, so briefly, I do after-school programs where I train or talk to kids about law enforcement, try to change their perception. Ultimately, I have a really, really cool email that I received the other day about a kid who's, comes from a gang-infested family. After seeing my presentation, it inspired him to be a police officer. He's an African-American kid, and his mom is going to sign him up for the Explorer program because she's like, man, awesome. I want to continue this. So that, to me, is work. I speak across schools. I speak to schools across the country, colleges, high schools. I also speak to police officers, helping officers recruit and retain the next generation, as well as changing their perception, the way they view the community. I have a podcast called It's Needed Podcast, one of the best podcasts you'll ever listen to. I'm not saying that because it's mine.
It's really good. I've listened to a few episodes. It's really good.
I appreciate that, T-Mac. So that's a good one. And, I got a lot of good things brewing in the making, man. So, yeah, man, I'm trying, like 49 said, trying to break that generational curse. And
good.
Shout out to anybody that's on this, man. I appreciate you guys following and supporting me. Dime Fitness, you my boy. I appreciate you. Whoever's on here, man. Let's keep it up together. And T-Mac, man, thanks for having me on.
Dude, I appreciate you taking the time, man. Wishing you and your family all the safety and love out there. Appreciate everything that all you cops do. Thanks again for everyone tuning in. Again, go follow Ryan, show him some love. And brother, have a good day, man.
You too, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, buddy.